Okay, it's time for me to confess. I did it. I started the war on Christmas. It was me. My birthday is December 24th, and I'm Jewish, and I just got so tired of hearing people say Merry Christmas to me, so I started a war on Christmas. And I gotta say, I think it worked. It's been months, and I haven't heard anybody say Merry Christmas to me. My free time is so limited during summer right now that I don't really have time during the day to record video as I have been doing because I always have one of my kids with me. And so I decided to, since I have a craft fair coming up, kill two birds with one stone. I'm preparing for the craft fair and I am recording a video, but there's no need to see my face at this point. So I decided to also just have the actual glasswork in there as well, which you can see on my glass TikTok, Glass Goose. But like one of the things that's going to be different is you're going to see how slow this is. For my glass TikToks, I speed up the footage anywhere from like 2 times speed to like 5 times speed, and also I do a lot of cuts. So, if you still don't want to watch this, by all means, just listen. I will still be putting stuff in the void. Today is very illustrative. You may also hear clicking coming from my kiln. That's this thing here, as it heats up to 1050 degrees. So just ignore that. Also, I know that since I'm right-handed, I should be showing this video from the other direction, but I don't know. I didn't really want my grody garage door in the background. I know this, what you're seeing isn't much better, but like, anyway, since I want to talk extensively about important topics, I decided to make something that I can make almost in my sleep at this point, which is egg earrings. So that's what I'll be making, at least to start, is eggs. I have expressed before that I really wanted this YouTube channel to be about education more than politics, and I think I had some plans to make a few more politically themed videos, but with the way that things are ramping up in the United States, there's just no point to it anymore. It's like by the time this video comes out, it's already going to be irrelevant. Like my first video was about Elon Musk's Nazi salute, and now we're at like Elon and Trump have broken up, so what does that even matter anymore, you know? I've decided to just talk about what I want to talk about and what I've been, leading up to here. What I want to talk about is the failure of the American education system specifically. I've seen a lot of videos and articles. Ooh, I'm leaning into the frame a little bit here. Hi. I've seen a lot of videos and articles lately from teachers who are frustrated and fed up with students who are from this generation. They don't want to read, they don't want to learn, they want to use AI for everything. I fully empathize, but I think that I also always want people to talk about how the system is designed and maybe consider my kind of central thesis, maybe even for this entire YouTube channel, but certainly for this video and possibly subsequent videos, which is that students aren't failing school. School is failing our students. There's just so many things that I want to talk about in reforming the education system and what's going wrong with it and why it needs to be reformed, and things that have been talked about already. There was a very popular video years and years ago that everyone should still watch called I Just Sued the School System. And it's incredibly relevant and sums up a lot of the huge problems that still have not been addressed, despite the fact that they are not secret. They are, in fact, quite obvious. And so I want to talk about that, but I have to do a disclaimer first. And I might be doing this disclaimer at the beginning of all of my, videos about education, which is I was a teacher for 4 or 5 years. I can't really remember. I started teaching in 2016 and stopped teaching in 2020, at the end of the 2020 school year, so 4 or 5 years, whatever. And I was not a good teacher. I was perhaps even a bad teacher. I'm sure I have several students who will swear up and down that I'm the worst teacher they've ever had. And I think that some of them don't have justification for that, because, I just wanted them to like work hard and use their brains, and others are fully justified. But I wasn't the kind of bad teacher that needed to be led out of the school in handcuffs. Like, I don't really want to say it out loud, but just the type of teachers who are doing illegal things is not, that wasn't me. I was the type of teacher who was teaching with undiagnosed ADHD and neurodivergence. And so I struggled mightily with just, my energy levels and like distinguishing what was okay to say in a professional setting and what wasn't okay to say. Again, nothing illegal, but just sometimes not acting as mature as I should have and letting things slip out that I and the frustration that I had with not knowing why these things were happening because I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until several years, not several years, no, at least 1 year after I quit teaching. So to know that that was my dream career, and then I quit because I realized that I was probably doing more harm than good um, to myself, and just the system was so frustrating that I realized that I couldn't really be in it anymore and be happy. I will always accept my culpability in and my failings in this career path. And so I quit teaching and then took a sabbatical or whatever, and went to class school and got diagnosed with ADHD and learned, why I had been a bad teacher, but I will never go back to that profession. So I'm not giving advice or anything like that from the perspective of like the best teacher ever and I'm a saint. Like I said, I failed many students not with grades but with my actions, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But that being said, I was a student in the American education system, and I was a teacher in the American education system. And this system is deeply, deeply flawed. And there are some important questions when analyzing how and why a system is flawed that need to be asked. And the issue that arises is the way that the systems that are in place in America, and I guess any government, are inextricably linked. The reason I had that caveat about me being a bad teacher was there was one activity that I kind of like stumbled into. Again, I was given to improvisation as a teacher, considering, the ADHD. So I don't even know where I was going with it at the time, but I felt it was an interesting thought experiment to do with the kids. And so I try not to say kids, actually. I have a lot of people in childcare and in teaching who will say kiddos. And it's like, do you think that students like being called kiddos? Like, one of the issues we will run into is just like how little respect is given to students in the education system. And I feel like calling them kids is not what they would want. They want to be respected as adults and treated as adults. And so I tried to train myself to say students rather than kids, especially since I taught 16, 17, 18-year-olds, some of whom were legally adults. So if I say kids, I'm often going to correct myself, and that's why. But I don't know if the students enjoyed this, but they certainly engaged with it. And one of the big buzzwords in teaching is engagement. You need to try to engage your students. You need to try to make them actively interact with education. And this was something that they engaged with, and I thought it was very interesting. And it is relevant to kind of how I think everybody would find it interesting, I guess. So I'm going to go through it, but also I think it's just a quick way to say, no, it's a slow way to segue into just like how difficult it is to actually fix a system, a single system in a functional society, or in our case, a dysfunctional society. So and you can turn to the void for this because this is a visual thing if you want to, or you can just listen. It's not particularly complicated to understand. So I went to the whiteboard and I put the words "your brain" on the whiteboard in a circle. And then I asked the students, what are some things that affect your brain? Like how you act and how you think. And I got so many answers so quickly that oftentimes I had trouble like writing them down fast enough, which is great. That's the kind of thing that you want. So it was like, they would say school, obviously, right? Education. They would say parents and family. Pretty quickly, I would say, almost every time, the word stress would come up. And after the first time or two that I did this, I would put stress in all caps for sure. And then somebody who thought they were going to get in trouble for saying this would point out drugs and or alcohol. And I did not ever say like, how dare you say the word drugs in school? But I think that they thought they were being a little edgy for saying it. And I would say, yes, some people never engage with illicit substances. Some people do occasionally, and some people struggle with addiction, and that can definitely affect your brain. They would say your community. They would say your religion. The only thing I pushed back on was emotions. So if they said emotions affect your brain, I actually said, like I told them, I think emotions are the one thing that aren't affecting your brain. I think they are the output. So when your brain is affected, emotion is the result. What makes you happy? What makes you sad? What makes you scared? So that was the one thing that I did not put on there. And they came up with other things like injury or illness. things like that. And what I would do is I would start drawing arrows. So arrows of effect. So stress, arrow to the brain, parents, arrow to the brain. But then I started to say, well, you know what? Don't parents affect your stress as well, right? Doesn't being sick affect your stress? Doesn't it affect, doesn't your religion affect your family and vice versa? And so I started drawing all these arrows back and forth, kind of showing the direction of effect. And I realized, and this I swear wasn't my intention, I don't think, but I realized that I was starting to draw what looked like a very crude diagram of a brain. And what we inevitably came to was that almost everything affects stress in some way. And this was just like, this wasn't like everybody's brain. Like we accepted that like not everybody has had injury to the brain, but it was kind of just general things that could affect the thinking and behavior of a person. And that stress was high up on there. And I don't remember the point of the lesson at all. But I thought it was a good thought experiment for the students, at least, to think about, what was affecting them and how they were affecting others and things like that. I find that when it comes to changing a single system, the same problem, well, not the problem, I suppose, but the same, endless kind of cycle of what affects what and the arrows going everywhere and all that stuff is present. So if you take the American education system, you can directly like take one thing that needs to change. Students need sleep. This is something that honestly doesn't, in my opinion, need studies to prove. I think that like saying like young people need sleep to function and learn should have just been kind of common sense. But yes, there have been studies that prove this. Students need sleep. So what does that mean? Well, it means that the school day should probably start later, right? Start later and probably end later as a result. So instead of students going to school from 7:50 to 2:30 or 3 o'clock, they might have to go to school from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. But the problem is that this runs up against, what do I want to call it? Not the system of capitalism, labor, the system of labor, right? So parents have work, and I would argue that it is easier to find childcare in the afternoon than it is to find at 7 a.m. And so we run up against like, how are parents going to get their kids to school if their school day starts a full hour after the parents are supposed to be at work? And how are parents going to pick up their kids from school if it's later, right? Things like that. How are they going to find childcare for exactly 1 hour every day? Maybe they only need childcare from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. now. How is that going to happen? And what you're finding also is that this runs up against an absent system in our country, which is what I will call the childcare system. There is no system of childcare. Childcare exists, but I would say that it is part of the labor system, right? Childcare is a job, and it is something that people seek out as a service to pay money for. It is not a system that is in place. So just that one thing, it runs up against the absent system and it runs up against labor, and I'm sure you can think of others. So when we look at the education system, we have to also take into account every other major system that exists in the country. And again, I'm speaking about America specifically, but this can be applicable in other places as well. So what systems do I think are going to be inextricably linked? Like I said, the system of labor, which I consider capitalism, honestly. It might be that capitalism and money are a separate system. We also have the system of government, right? So in our case, it would be a democratic, supposedly, system. We have what I find it fascinating. I was thinking about this as I was planning this video. The criminal justice system is such an interesting phrase. Like, of all the people receiving justice, criminals probably, like, it depends on, so first of all, it depends on if you're talking about criminal as in a person who does crime, or criminal as in describing something that has to do with crime, which I think it is the latter, and also how you define justice. Like, I think that justice is seen as such a positive word that it's like, well, the criminal isn't getting justice, but they're getting justice like served to them, right? Isn't that the idea? Justice is served. Anyway, so I just call it the justice system. And also that is deeply flawed. And then I'm actually going to separate the justice system from, I don't want to call it a punishment system, just prison system, I suppose, because that is its own animal in a lot of ways. And it requires its own reform and, deep study and things like that. So they're inextricably linked, and they're related to one another, and one is born of the other. But I think it's worth considering that, the justice or rehabilitation part of the criminal justice system is deeply flawed as well, and is its kind of own animal. Healthcare system, we can already say that is definitely linked to whatchamacallit, labor, the system of labor and capitalism, because, you know, in America, people have to have a job in order to get healthcare a lot of times. And then also think about how a student who has a sick family member, or a student who is sick themselves, how that will affect their schooling. I'm not going to, how do I say this? It's impossible to talk about reforming one of these systems without running up against a problem with another, and why reforming that system doesn't work. It's, there's corruption in government, there's, bad actors, there's, taxation, there we go. I'll throw that up there. There's a system of taxation. There's a system of law, right? Like, even if we look just like, at a microcosm, like there's a system of driving law. There are rules in place for, who can and can't drive a car, right? So there's a system of law. And so, and I guess, I don't know, social services have to be in there somewhere. I'm not quite sure. Just a system for to care for people who cannot care for themselves necessarily. And I suppose like a retirement system, and things like that. And finances also include like banking and savings and 401ks and things that I'm very grateful that my husband understands, because I don't. So what I want to acknowledge here is that I am aware that we cannot make most of the changes that are necessary, or even like some of the changes that are necessary to the education system, because it is so linked to these other systems. And that's probably one of many reasons why it has stalled out. We just, because how do you address all of them at once? It's very difficult, and also takes a lot of effort, which I don't know. At this point, I'm not sure politicians are really into the whole effort making thing. So I'm acknowledging that. But I cannot possibly address all the things I want to talk about if I feel obligated to constantly go back and say, and yes, I know this runs up against such and such system, and that's why we can't change it. So I want to acknowledge right off the bat that I see this, I know this, right? I know that these problems exist. But I would still like to talk about education as a system without constantly, backtracking and adding caveats and disclaimers and things like that. So that's why I want to acknowledge this at the top. Yes, it is incredibly difficult to change a system like this. It's acknowledged, and now we will move on to our questions. When we look at the functionality of a system, I think it is really important to ask some questions about, just to ask some questions. So number one, another reason why you're seeing this all the time is because I can't put my phone over here because it would interfere with opening my kiln. I have a very small workbench. What can I say? Number one, who is the system supposed to serve? If you think about the education system and one of the deep flaws in it, the education system is supposed to serve the students. It is doing a job for the students. It is educating them. And so it is very strange to me that students' voices and their needs and desires and wants and criticisms and complaints are so disregarded. I mean, if you think about it, it's like you hire somebody to clean your house. You've hired them. They work for you. It's your house. And you hired them for a reason. You really want them to wash your windows and do your dishes. I don't know. And it would really help you a lot. You have a busy schedule and you have money to spend on this, so you'd like them to do this for you. It would be really strange if this person came into your house and started doing your laundry. And then to have them say, when you tell them, like, no, that's not what I hired you to do, that's not what I want you to do, to have them say, well, I'm doing your laundry. You don't get a say in this. And so this is essentially what is happening to students, because it's not like students are quiet about what they feel school is lacking, what disappoints them about their schooling. Recent graduates especially will be more than happy to tell you, looking back, what do you wish had been part of your schooling. And what I learned about students pretty quickly was even the most taciturn student will happily engage if you bring up a topic they feel knowledgeable about and that they care about. Anytime that you give the students an opportunity to educate you about something, they will be talking over each other, which you should not. You should facilitate them taking turns, but you should not be like, hey, shut up. I feel like anytime you're telling a student, like, I don't want to hear from you in any capacity, it lingers in their minds. We have this frustration of students who are being told what to learn. They constantly have control and choice taken away from them. And yes, there's been psychological studies about choice. I'll get into that in a second. And then they're told in many different ways, little and big ways, that their opinions don't matter. Their feelings about the system that they are in, that they are legally required to be in, and that is supposed to be serving them, that is supposed to be working for them, their opinions are just irrelevant. Their thoughts are irrelevant. Their complaints are irrelevant. And so why should they pay attention in class? Is TikTok a big problem? Yes, sure. AI, I could and probably will do a whole video about how much I hate AI. I've done a short one on TikTok, but I messed up the files for the animation. So the animation was so low quality that TikTok told me basically like, I'm not going to show anybody this. And like, fair enough, TikTok. I'm not saying like, oh, we don't have problems, but when you constantly tell someone, no, you don't get to choose. No, you don't have control over this. You cannot go to the bathroom when you want to. You cannot talk to your friends when you want to. You cannot eat when you want to. And then you tell them, no, your opinions don't matter here. Your feelings don't matter here. Of course, they are going to become resentful. And of course, many of them are going to lash out or just disengage. What, like this isn't secret. Many of the people who you would talk to about education would say they actively did this themselves. So it is ridiculous to say, not ridiculous, I can't say, I stand in solidarity with those frustrated teachers so much, but it is irresponsible to talk about the failings of students without also talking about how we are failing students. And some of the things that I want to get into in future videos are things like standardized testing and content. As a preview, I was an English teacher, even though math is my best subject, because I wanted to be able to answer the question of why should I learn this with something other than because you have to, because it's part of the curriculum. I want to tell you about something, I don't know, it was like a study or an interview or something that the school system I worked for did, where they asked employers or something what kind of traits they look for in employees. And the employer said things like teamwork skills, critical thinking, responsibility, things like that. And basically they listed a bunch of things that the school board realized, or whoever was doing the study or interview or whatever, whoops, sorry about noise, I dropped my tweezers. They discovered that they got so close to like figuring it out. They were like, wait, but students aren't learning any of this. They're not learning any of these skills. And it's like, yeah, thank you, you got it. You figured it out. And so what they did, and this was one of the things that encouraged me or made me realize I needed to get out of this system, was they decided that they would introduce a new project that all students in high school would have to do in order to graduate. So yet another graduation requirement. Remember that stress thing we were talking about? And what they would have to do is they'd have to create a website for themselves, about themselves, where there was a tab for each of these traits that employers said they wanted. And by the way, how wonderful to shape students' education based on their employability, but that's always been the case. So they would have to come up with things that they had done in school that actually did teach them the traits that were desirable or whatever. So instead of saying like, hey, we need to change how school looks and what it's teaching students and how it's teaching students, change the curriculum, change the goals, they just said, well, what we'll do is we'll have students shoehorn these things into the things they're already learning into these newly developed ideas and goals and whatever, so that we don't have to change a thing. The curriculum can remain as is, but now we ask them to really think about how taking an algebra test taught them critical thinking skills. And that was so laughable to me and so depressing at the same time, that I realized that there are bigger problems that are never going to get addressed. So they realized that students weren't learning anything that they actually needed to know for employability, which capitalism, see, things run up against other systems, in this case the system of capitalism, and labor. And their solution was to just make them say they had learned those things after all. And I was very frustrated by this, and students were very frustrated by this. I especially was frustrated by this as I was an English teacher, and whenever students had to learn something new or do a new project like this, it came to English class. So there was a mini unit on doing interviews and resumes and cover letters that was taught during English class by a different teacher. So I just kind of sat at my desk and graded papers while the career counselor lady did this 3-day lesson or whatever, and stuff like that. So English teachers once again had to set aside their curriculum, which they rigidly had to adhere to because of standards and whatever, in order to accommodate this new and pointless project. And all I could tell my students when they asked why, because I encouraged asking why all the time, why do I have to do this? I could only say, because you have to, because I am required to make you. And it was incredibly depressing for everybody. So who is it supposed to work for? The students. Well, we've heard from students. Students say they really wish they knew how to pay their taxes, for instance. That's a big one, right? There's a lot of memes about how, like they can't get a job, but at least they know the quadratic formula, right? Or they don't know how to apply for an apartment, but at least they know the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. So students have already been vocal about what they wish they had learned or wish they were learning in school. Another issue is that school is is just depressingly not keeping up with technology. Like we're putting every kid a tablet in front of every kid instead of like a notebook, but we're not acknowledging that if they needed to know the quadratic equation, they could just ask Siri. It is not necessary anymore for students to learn complicated mathematics unless they're interested in complicated mathematics, especially since a lot of mathematics can be done in the moment. If they really want to know how to find the area of a cylinder, they can Google it and learn from there. As many people pointed out, and I was told, right, you're not always going to have a calculator in your pocket, is no longer a valid reason to learn complicated math. Yes, students need to learn addition, subtraction. What I discuss with my husband is basically like everything up to about 8th grade, pre-algebra, right? Percentages, fractions, understanding what a variable is and how to solve it. Those problems are important. Those math problems are important to students, I think, in my opinion. But when you get to forcing them to take algebra 2 and geometry and statistics and calculus and pre-calculus, it's like, well, why? Like some people do need these things for sure, but not everybody. And if they're not interested in it, studies have been done about the retention. They don't retain it. Basically, many studies have been done and all give you some variation on if students are bored, they're not going to learn or they're not going to remember beyond like whatever they need to know for a test. And so one of the videos I'm going to do also, speaking of tests, is about grading and how by having a system of grades, you are changing the focus and the priority of a student to not from like, what will I learn from this? Or how will this help me or benefit me? Or what are my struggles here? But just like, when is this going to be in the grade book? How many points is it worth? Will I be able to go to prom? Because in my school, students who are failing too many classes couldn't participate in extracurricular activities or prom or things like that, so they couldn't like do sports or whatever. And then of course, like many systems, the school system is designed to punish poverty, so I'll have to look into that as well. I guess what this video is like an introduction paragraph with a thesis statement, but I want to talk about the other questions that should be asked. And one of the questions is like, what is, if you want to tell if it's working, right, what is the stated intent and what is the actual output, right? The stated intent of the American education system or any education system would probably be something along the lines of educating young people and preparing them for adult life, right? That the intent is to give students an education. But even though nobody would say like, oh, well, the purpose of the education system is to provide childcare for parents while they work, that is absolutely one of the unstated intentions. You can tell because of things like what I pointed out with, they don't change the school start and end times, right? And school is 5 days a week because parents work is 5 days a week, things like that, and of course people complain about like, what that Onion article said about like school homing, where it's like teachers now also have to like teach students how to behave properly or whatever. And of course, like I don't want to just repeat the I just sued the school system video, but one of the intentions of schooling may also be to, prepare students to be part of capitalism. Again, we talk about like entering the workforce and what do they need to enter the workforce. For my school system, when I worked in it, it was like students need to be college, military, or career ready, which like, I mean, that kind of encapsulates a lot, right? But what about just societally ready, right? What about feeling valued? Why is that not one of the intentions of school, is to make students feel valued, to prepare students for adult life? Well, no, right? That should be one of the intended uses of the system, one of the intended functions of the system. But again, students have pointed out that they don't know how to do their taxes. They don't know how to buy a house. They don't know how to budget. They don't know when they're being, taken in by a scam or whatever it may be. They don't know how to file a police report, maybe. So is it serving its stated function of educating young people? Well, first of all, I'm first and only the answer is no, right? First of all, what I was going to say is the things that it's trying to teach them, like algebra, and you'll notice that I'm talking mostly about high school because that's what I taught at. I'll get to that in a second, but like algebra, chemistry, you know, Mesopotamian history, right, are things that they forget or don't want to know or aren't interested in. And so it may or may not prepare them for a test on these things in the moment, but later in life, they certainly do, you know, forget about it. And so they're not even retaining the knowledge that they're being presented with as it is. It is also not teaching them the skills they want to know and frankly should know in order to live an adult life, you know, be a functional member of society, right? A capitalist society in this case. And I think also, like, from a personal experience, like, I only know about the American uh, government through, I didn't take a government or civics or ethics class. I only took the required US history course. And so I only know about the American government, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, through the lens of what it was like when it first happened. And so I know that modern history books go up past 9/11 and into COVID and all that and stuff like that, but like, I'm not sure that I ever knew why it was worth it to vote for anything other than president or what a ballot would look like. And that's a failing, I think. You know, that if voting is so all fired important, why aren't we all as young people learning about the process, not through Schoolhouse Rock or whatever, but actually, you know, having mock elections and debates and learning about the different elements of the system, the government system as it is today, and not just when George Washington signed the Magna Carta. I think that the system is failing on all counts for its one stated goal. The thing that, you know, the thing that people will say out loud. Well, it's supposed to educate young people. It is not doing that for the most part, especially when they get to be, you know, adolescents, right? I mean, like, yeah, we have people who supposedly know how to do basic math that they learn in elementary school, but I've also heard a lot of teachers talking about how they have students who are 12 years, 13 years and older who can't read. It's a little bit trickier to answer the kind of like, what are the unstated goals? Like I said, childcare is one of them. And also I wonder if it's about the criminal justice system as well. This idea that like idle hands are the devil's workshop. So we keep students in school because it keeps them off the streets. It keeps them off drugs, supposedly. It keeps them out of gangs. It keeps them out of crime, and stuff like that. And I don't know. I'm not nearly educated enough in areas of civics and, you know, criminal justice and law to say how successful that is. I would love to hear somebody else talk about it. So if you have a link to somebody who's talking about it, or if you yourself know something, please comment. But how successful is school at keeping, quote, kids off the streets, right? How successful is it at teaching them, you know, drugs are bad and gangs are bad and don't be a criminal? So is the school system successful? Is it successful at its unstated goals? I don't know. I mean, it provides childcare in that, you know, as long as, you know, everyone's fine and healthy, but is it really functioning in any other capacity? I don't think so. Is it serving the people who it's supposed to be working for, the students? I don't think so. I don't think it listens to them at all. I think it dehumanizes them to an alarming degree, and they feel it. They're not stupid. They know that their opinions and voices are not being heard. One of my biggest pet peeves is people who say, like, you've got to prepare for the real world. What that says to a student is, you are not currently in the real world. Wherever you are right now, you're in limbo, you're in a fantasy. This isn't real. Your opinions don't matter yet. Your thoughts don't matter yet. Your needs don't matter yet. What a horrible thing to say. You need to prepare for the real world. They're living in the real world right now. When they go home, they live in the real world. When they're in school, they're living in a real world. The school system is a part of the real world. It's so terrible to say that to them. And so what I used to say is post-high school life, I think, or something like that, or post-graduation. You're supposed to be prepared for that. Adult life was another one. But again, it's not doing that. And then I also want to talk extensively about the absence system, the childcare system, where we look at things like paid family leave and subsidizing childcare and things like that. Because once upon a time, women were just supposed to be home with the kids, and they weren't supposed to like ask for remuneration for that. Remuneration. They weren't supposed to ask for a salary because they were just supposed to be happy to be doing their job as women. They owed it to men to bear children and raise children. And so we never really, planned for women marching in the streets for equal treatment, able to vote, able to work, now marching for, equal pay, things like that. That the system wasn't prepared for feminism. And you can see that in all the people who believe that feminism is some sort of disease or bad word, or, you know, they picture the world's worst straw feminist and think that that's a representation of it. And so we have a lot to talk about, but I've already been rambling for so long that I'll just say for now, school is failing its students, and we need to listen to young people as if their voices matter, and not tell them, sure, that's great, but wait until you're older and then we'll give you an opinion. And yeah, I guess, what am I supposed to say? Like and subscribe, and I don't know, email me if you want some egg earrings. No, please don't do that. I mean, you can. I take custom orders. I'll put the link for my custom order form in the thingy at the bottom of the video. Okay. Bye.